Ahoy, mateys, and welcome to another episode of I'm Ready, a SpongeBob SquareCast. My name is Captain Eric, and we are continuing our sail through the second season of SpongeBob SquarePants, and I am proud to say that I have a special guest on today's episode. I spoke with Joey Weiser, who not only worked on the SpongeBob comics and has his own line of graphic novels through Oni Press, but he happens to also be one of the last SpongeBob artists to be a part of Nickelodeon magazine before it closed down, and then they transferred over to just making SpongeBob comics. So Joey and I watched the episode Gary Takes a Bath and had a wonderful conversation about his world in art, what he's currently got going on, his work in SpongeBob, and then of course we talk about the episode Gary Takes a Bath. But before we take a break, I do want to mention that today's episode is brought to you by Running Scared Motion Pictures, and I want you to check out their TikTok channel at RSMP_. They just started putting out videos, and go give them a like on TikTok. Go follow their stuff. I appreciate that. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we're going to meet up with Joey Weiser and watch Gary's Takes a Bath.
Gary! There's a bomb strapped to my chest! It's gonna explode in 3 seconds unless you take a bath! Please?
Magic Conj, will I ever get to meet Tom Kenny?
Maybe someday.
Oh, so you're saying there's a chance. Okay. Should I tell fans of the show how they can support us?
Yes.
Goofy Goobers, supporting the show is shockingly easier than catching a blue jellyfish. Right from our anchor page, anchor.fm/SpongePod, you can find links to all of our social media and a support button if you happen to have a few extra clams. Also follow us on twitch.tv/SpongeBobPodcast, where it's not only the official home to our sister show, Video Bob Game Pants, it's also where I stream live drawings of various Nickelodeon characters and host the opportunity for commissions and giveaways. Lastly, the official merchandise store is now open at redbubble.com/people/SpongePod, where various designs will be uploaded inspired by our show, including our official logo, which is now available on a multitude of products like t-shirts, stickers, duvet covers, and even a shower curtain. This is a podcast by a fan, for fans, and will always be fan-driven. Any way you see fit on supporting our show is much appreciated. Thank you, and enjoy.
Hello, fancy French restaurant? I've got a naughty snail here who won't take a bath. What? Could you say that again? Slow down, it's like you're speaking some other language.
One of the many facets of SpongeBob SquarePants, one of the many different avenues that Nickelodeon has decided to bring the sponge was not just your television to your movie screen to books to other forms of entertainment, toys, 4D rides. They also brought SpongeBob to comics, and I am honored today to be talking to someone who had a hand in helping out with not only the SpongeBob comics, but has an entire art world that I promise you will have a great time if you delve into. Today, joining me to talk about Gary Takes a Bath is not only Joey Weiser. Thank you so much, Joey, for coming on today.
Hey, yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem. I of course, was a fan of your art without even realizing who you were. And one of the nice things about diving into the back of SpongeBob and really getting to look at every artist on Twitter and going down the rabbit hole of what they do and what they draw on a day-to-day basis, like I have fallen in love with just art again. And
cool.
Going back to the SpongeBob comics and coming across you, I delved really hard into the world you created, and it just like you were doing a lot of cool stuff that I enjoy, and man, you just do a lot of cool things out there. So the fact that you helped out with SpongeBob at all is one cool thing, but that's why anybody should just go into this world of Ghost Hog and Dragon Racer and Merman and just this whole world you've created on your own.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, like I do these creator-owned or these things that I've created and do my own work, but then it was always nice to have the SpongeBob work as well, not just because it was a nice job, but because like when I would be talking to just somebody new and they'd be like, what do you do? And I say, I make comics. And they'd be like, what do you make? And I'd tell them about my books, and 9 times out of 10 they hadn't heard of them. But then I could say, and I work on the SpongeBob comic book, and they'd be like, oh, that's a real thing.
That's always your hook right there.
Yeah, totally.
But I mean, even like I said, like the SpongeBob stuff was for me, diving into your work was a tip of the iceberg, because seeing the other things that you've been able to create, I got to imagine you've been drawing for a long time. I hate to assume, but how did that start for you? Where did this all begin for you, really?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've been drawing for as long as I can remember, and I think that my story is pretty similar to a lot of artists, where as I recall, when I was a little kid, everybody I knew drew, and we were all drawing in class or drawing, when we were hanging out and making up stories and stuff. And then one by one, kind of, I look back and I realized, like, eventually a lot of my other friends started finding other interests, but I was always still drawing and drawing and drawing, and always loved comics and cartoons. And yeah, just kind of kept at it, and then eventually went to an art school in Savannah, Georgia, where I majored in comics. Sequential art was just the fancy word for comics there. And
Actually, what is it? Sequential art? I've actually never heard of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even in any of the art schools I looked at after high school.
Yeah.
That's pretty creative.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like, I think when they were trying to figure out different ways to talk about comics, I think maybe around the same time that people were coming up with terms like graphic novels and things like that. Sequential art is good because not only was I studying comics, I was also studying like storyboarding and illustration and things like that involve, telling a story through art in a sequence.
Was that an easy gateway to kind of connect with others in the field professionally as well?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's like, it's hard for me to like guarantee, like, sometimes when people ask if I recommend going to art school or not, like, it's hard for me to say like, yes, you definitely should, or no, you definitely shouldn't. But like, I know in my case, a lot of the like other cartoonists who I still collaborate with, or at least keep in touch with and promote each other's work, are students that I went to school with, or editors and things that I met through the school, from them like visiting and things like that. So it was definitely very beneficial in that way, and as well as in my personal life. Like, a lot of my friends are still people that I were classmates of mine, or like the first time I ever went to a comic convention and showed off my work as an artist, rather than just as an attendee, was with like some classmates of mine, and and through that I met lots of other cartoonists and stuff too. And it's just like, it's hard to know if I would have like been as savvy to know about doing that stuff if it hadn't been for some of my classmates.
How was that first convention for you? What was that experience like?
It was very exciting. It was in 2004, so quite a ways away. And it was the Small Press Expo, which is called SPX, in Bethesda, Maryland. And I set up with a couple of my other classmates, and this was the first time that I had made mini comics, like zines, like handmade little comics that I could sell. And I also, that show had an anthology, like a collection of short stories with lots of different people who were attending that show, and I submitted to it, kind of figuring, well, I guess I should get in the habit of doing this kind of thing. And to my surprise, I got in. So it was like my first publication, my first time really presenting myself as an artist. And so, yeah, that was a very exciting show.
I got to imagine that the just the kind of the initial jitters before going in and doing it.
Definitely.
But you have to just meet good people, even if they don't know who you are. They come over and they see what you can do, and they're just blown away. I that's why, at least if I go to a con, I try to stop at every table just to see, like, hey, what do you do? Do I like any of this? And then just kind of scoot along. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. And I a lot of times actually do kind of enjoy, being behind a table and talking to people about my work, because it's a lot easier for me to have those kinds of conversations when I just have the work out in front of me, where people can look at it and see exactly what I do, and see if it like hits them or not. So yeah, I do actually kind of like the act of tabling at conventions, even though it can be a grind. At the end of day 3 or something, you're like, okay, I've talked to like I don't even know how many people at this point, but like I do enjoy it because like I said, it has like a good starting point. Like, here's my work. What do you think about it?
I mean, it's kind of classic carnival barking in a way. You're just kind of going out there and throwing it out to the biggest crowd possible. Like, hopefully, whoever shows up to the con. I've noticed you have a really consistent art style, and a lot of the characters you have pretty much intertwine in each other's stories. Have you been drawing these characters have these been characters you've had for a long time in your like your mind that you've just been drawing for a while, or are these more recent things that have just happened?
They're more recent. Yeah, the merman characters probably I had around for a year or two before I started the books, and that really came from like kind of a failed idea where I was trying out this idea of comics starring like little kid versions of classic movie monsters, and that story didn't really like, I don't know, after doing like a few stories with those characters, I decided I didn't really want to do that, but I did really like this character that was like a little kid version of the creature from the Black Lagoon, and he didn't look like Merman, but I kind of took that idea and ran with it. And so yeah, these ideas kind of like evolve. And then while I was working on Merman, that was 5 books, and that took me I think about 7 years to get all those books out.
Wow, that is a lot of dedication to that character.
Yeah, definitely. And so, in my sketchbooks, I would occasionally just doodle new ideas and stuff that didn't have anything to do with Merman. And the Ghost Hog character came from that, where I was just kind of doodling and just, I don't even know why, but I drew this little ghost pig character, and I thought that they were fun. And so I just kind of like put that in the back of my mind and said, okay, well, don't think about this too much right now because I have to work on these Merman books. But like maybe after that, I can revisit this pig character and see if that's something I want to do. And that turned into Ghost Hog. And then Dragon Racer kind of came around the same time. I think when I was working on Ghost Hog, I just had to start kind of thinking about what I wanted to do next. And I came up with this dragon that drives in like a race against other creatures and animals. And it just sounded fun to me, and it came from liking like racing movies and things like that. But when I kind of had that idea, I realized that it could kind of exist in the same world as Ghost Hog. And so I tied them together in that way.
Yeah, it really, at some points, it reminds me of Wacky Racers.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, after like looking at the art more, I really get a Diddy Kong Racing feel of the presentation of the animals and all of their different vehicles and whatnot.
That's fun. I like that.
And I'm a sucker for cohesive worlds. Like that's a big thing, obviously, with Marvel and other storytelling and what they're doing out there. So, and one thing that you said, I do want to point out, very early on, you said when you started the monster book with all of the young versions, you got pretty far before you decided to kind of stop right there.
Yeah, I drew maybe a 20-page mini comic that had like 2 or 3 stories with those characters in it. Is about what I did with those characters. Yeah.
And that's a lot of work to be able to stop kind of cold and say, all right, I'm going to kind of restart off of one jumping point. Like, at least you were able to know. I feel like some people go further before they're able to finally realize, like, okay, this isn't working out. So that was, like, I'm glad you said that, because a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to know because, like, making comics is a lot of work, and sometimes it's less fun than others. And it is hard to know when you're just kind of like working on something and it's a bit of a drag just because you don't feel like drawing at that very moment, or if you're just actually not really that interested in what you're working on. And I think you just have to really like pay attention to yourself and your instincts and know, like, if I keep kind of trying to think of new ideas and not feeling excited about it, then that means that either something needs to change about this or it's just not going to work at all, you know?
Of SpongeBob, how did that happen and come about for you?
Yeah, so that was I had recently moved to Athens, Georgia, where I live now, and was just looking for work because I had quit like a day job, non-art related day job, and reached out to a friend of mine who's a cartoonist, Dave Roman, who is also at the time was an editor of the comics section in Nickelodeon magazine.
I did notice that on your website you had worked, your first project with Nickelodeon was on that magazine, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So I asked Dave, you know, is there anything that you got for me? And he said, well, I don't have anything, but this other editor there, Chris Duffy, is looking for people to work on SpongeBob stories. And I was like, yeah, sure, I like SpongeBob, you know, and I like watched a bunch of SpongeBob to get kind of in the headspace, and I pitched him a few ideas, and I don't remember, I think maybe he took like one or two out of the 3 or 4 ideas that I had come up with, and I was just writing the stories, and they had other artists draw them, and it was seeming like it was going to be a really great job. And then I get something published, and I get my copy of that Nickelodeon magazine in the mail, and I'm very excited. And when I look at it, I notice in the, I don't remember, top or bottom corner, it says our final issue. And it was the last issue of Nickelodeon magazine.
Wow, I had no idea about that. That is, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, you still made it. That's crazy.
Yeah. So it was this weird, like, excitement and disappointment at the same time. But then a few months later, that editor, Chris Duffy, like reached out to anybody who had done SpongeBob comics in the past and let us know that they were going to start their very own SpongeBob comic book.
Which was smart.
Yeah, yeah. And so I had the opportunity again, and I just started sending in ideas. And it was about that same hit rate. He'd take about half of the ideas that I would send him. And after a while, he let me, I was approved to start drawing some of my own comics too, but it was exciting to have other artists work from my scripts too. But yeah, that was really cool. And Steve Hillenberg, I never spoke with him directly, but he did approve everything that came through the comic books. He was actually pretty involved in the comics from what I understand. So it's pretty awesome to know that he did at least like see everything I was doing and put his stamp of approval on it, even if Chris was my main contact with that. And and that was really exciting. And that ran for several years until Bongo, the comics publisher that does The Simpsons, that was distributing the SpongeBob comics, ended up closing shop. And with that, the SpongeBob, that was not too soon after, or not too long after Steve had passed away. So I think just with all that kind of happening at once, they decided to, to stop making the SpongeBob comics too, which was too bad, but it was a good run for sure. Several years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I gotta, like, there's still a world and a room for SpongeBob comics out there. One of the best magazines I ever had from Nickelodeon was entirely filled with different artists' interpretation of SpongeBob in comic form, letting them just completely go off the rails with design and choice and everything. And as a kid, it was my favorite to read, in breakfast and whatnot. And there's so much more room for that because everybody brings such a nice flavor to SpongeBob when they draw, because it all comes from a place of joy, I imagine. Something like that.
Yeah, totally. And that's, Chris, the editor I was talking about, he would split those comic book issues to be about half and half on model, meaning like looking exactly like the show, and off model artists that would draw just whatever wacky art style they had, And yeah, it's definitely a testament to the really great character designs in SpongeBob that you can recognize them instantly, even when, Tony Millionaire or somebody with a really like crazy art style.
Yeah, so I mean, some of those artists that have worked on some of those comics have gotten the characters really good to where it almost even sometimes looks like frames from the show. and that's cool and all, but I love seeing every other artist's interpretation of the characters in the show and
Hmm.
their expressions. You always get something fresh, I don't know, from somebody just handling the character for a day.
Totally. Yeah. That was a fun thing that I liked about that comic book was seeing all the different interpretations. And I never knew what artists would be drawing my scripts. I would just send in the scripts, and then I'd get like images of the artwork and then get the final issues in the mail. And so it was pretty exciting sometimes to see if I got one of these guys that draws exactly like the show, which is very impressive in its own right, for sure. I can't do that. and then or one of these artists that does their own thing and does some pretty interesting stuff with those art styles.
Yeah, I've gotten well that if I think I have maybe like 2 or 3 poses for each character that I can draw consistently, 100% on model.
Nice.
But anytime I try to go out and I go, I want to do Squidward as something different than what I usually go with, it looks kind of different, and then on my own, uh, and it's something like every day I pretty much have just drawn SpongeBob somewhere in some way, shape, or form. And hey, I'm glad you got to experience that. I hope that there is a return for SpongeBob comics. But I also am glad that you are able to do your own thing. You have a pretty good relationship, I'm guessing, with Oni Press.
Yeah. They've published 7 of my books now at this point, which is really cool. And yeah, it's good. Like, I've worked with a few different editors there, and they all have slightly different, editing styles, but Oni Press is very good about like really wanting to honor the artist's visions and stuff. So if we have a disagreement, a lot of times we can come up to figure out something that we want to do with the story that that I'm happy with.
I mean, that's good to hear, and especially as an artist. You do we're always willing to bend a little bit, but then it's always nice to have the person above you meet you kind of in the middle and find that central respect.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And they're really good at, I can come up with my stories and think about what I want to draw and all this stuff, but they're really good at doing kind of the business side of things where they figure out who it's best to like market it to and how to get it in front of like librarians or booksellers and how to get them to understand what the book is, and figure out, if they'd like to stock it and stuff like that, which is very important because I'm, not super business minded. I must admit, I'm just, trying to think of stuff that I think would be fun to read or fun to draw when I'm creating my stories.
Well, you have a wonderful art style, a creative color palette. I absolutely adore it. So, like I said, everybody should definitely go check it out. Now, on back to SpongeBob, though, we did check out the episode Gary Takes a Bath, which has a very weird release schedule because the episode that precedes it, which was Shanghai, which was also a special called You Wish that aired years before this episode even premiered on Nickelodeon. So while Shanghai premiered in 2001, this first premiered on the Nicktoons Network in the United States on August 18th, 2002, and didn't premiere on the regular Nickelodeon channel until July 26th, 2003. So it pretty much almost 2.5 years since its sister episode first premiered.
Wow,
Did it
that's
air on the
interesting.
main network? It's crazy. It's incredibly short. It's only 6.5 minutes long. Of course, because the episode that precedes it has a lot of Patchy the Pirate segments and kind of overextends. This originally was a third season episode, but the last big thing is that this is the only episode of the entire series that just features Tom Kenny. There's not a single voice, even though there's a Mr. Krabs cameo. There's not a single other voice other than Tom Kenny. What are your thoughts on this episode? What do you think about it?
Yeah, I thought it was really fun. It's one of those kind of ideas that starts from almost kind of like writing a list of things that you can do, come up with kind of one premise. And instead of really like, there's not much of a story in this, it's more like a list of jokes of
Right, right.
things, different things that SpongeBob's doing to try to get Gary to take a bath. And so, yeah, it's just really fun, really funny.
You know what hit me the first time? I watched this episode a few days ago to prepare, and then watched before we recorded. Well, also while we recorded too, so 3 times. It hit me that the way that the writing style is for this episode and its length, it kind of feels like it would be a short for a movie you would see in theaters. Like if you went to go see a Nickelodeon movie, this would be a short that precedes it, because it's incredibly short, and it's just so simple of a concept that it plays, it's an audience pleaser.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that works really well for Gary, I think, since Gary doesn't speak besides meowing, but so you can get a lot of like kind of visual gags and things like that. And a thing about Gary, I always really loved Gary, and I love writing for Gary because I had a cat and I had a lot of like cat material, and that was something that that Chris Duffy kind of would have to occasionally remind me, like, now remember, Gary's a little magical too. He can kind of do stuff that you wouldn't expect a real pet to be able to do. And so I was definitely laughing at that part where SpongeBob's trying to get him in the bath, and then he almost gets him in there, and then Gary just kind of disappears and reappears on the floor.
One frame over, right next to him.
Yeah, so good.
It's weird because SpongeBob definitely, this episode shows it the best, that SpongeBob has that relationship that I think everybody has with their pets, is that we all create internally our idea of the communication between you and your animal. So when your animal kind of like meows back, you tend to just come up with what they would have said there and respond. And SpongeBob does that a lot here. And it's just funny because I'm like, everybody does that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. There's a few scenes of him like having pretty elaborate conversations with Gary, and Gary just kind of meowing back to him.
Now, as far as the notes from that is interesting. The notes from Chris Duffy were all pretty much, you said, approved from Nickelodeon, Steven Hillenburg and whatnot. When it came to Gary, did they ever say like he was fully aware of what was going on? Like he is the smartest one in the room?
I didn't hear that specifically. Yeah, I think that the kind of biggest note that I ever remember getting is what I said, where it was like, Gary is a pet, but can do things. It is kind of magical in a way where he can do things that you wouldn't expect a regular pet to do. But that, in the world of SpongeBob, people don't always necessarily acknowledge that, They don't say,
right.
It's weird that you could do this thing, and and there's also kind of different degrees with which, like, Gary is slimy or Gary is cuddly, or and things like that. I was pretty shocked in this one. There's a moment where he gets like splatted against the wall and his shell shatters into several pieces, because I don't think I had ever even thought to see Gary without his iconic swirly shell.
Yeah, it's a little sprinkle of dark humor in there, and they also had a few adult jokes. Some very earlier Nickelodeon kind of adult jokes that a bit shocking. It's like let's be real here. The soap one was pretty right on the nose. I'm surprised that was allowed.
It's one of those things that was like, kids don't know what it means, and it's a kind of thing where I would occasionally. I think when I was a kid, I knew that was a joke, but I didn't know what it meant,
Right, like that is such a funny joke. His wink and the smile and everything. Like who's not going to laugh at that?
Yeah, that's the thing I like about old Nickelodeon. It's a little grimy, It's a little dirty.
Yeah, the dirt, they cleaned it up, but it's weird. It came from people that grew up with that kind of dirt too. The ones who laughed at Tom and Jerry, but then will say that kind of violence in cartoons isn't allowed these days. And it's like, kid, you're kind of, kids are smarter than you think they are. And I've worked with kids for several years of various ages, and they understand that. They get it.
Mm-hmm.
I probably, like, one of my proudest moments that I can remember as a teacher was I showed like preschool to second grade age kids Hey Arnold's Christmas special. And yeah, they didn't really care about it until Mr. Wynn started talking about the war. And the second they were able to see, the second there was just fire and a soldier on screen and things got serious, all attention from that point on was on that Christmas special.
Wow. Yeah.
So kids can handle a little bit of seriousness, and they can also understand that you shouldn't hit people with a frying pan.
Definitely. Yeah, you know, I mean, pulling it back to my experience working on the comic, the SpongeBob comic, like that was a bit of advice I got pretty early on, was like, go ahead and like, you know, give us your most wild, crazy ideas, and we can tell you to dial it back. And it's a lot easier to work with that rather than you holding yourself back and us not even having something to work with, you know?
That's really smart of them.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And so I think that, and I do think that that really does kind of reflect at least the Nickelodeon that I remember, the sort of Nicktoons, early Nicktoons era. You know, SpongeBob, to give my age away a little bit, SpongeBob was when I was in high school. So I thought of it a bit more as my younger sister's kind of generation of shows. But like, so I kind of grew up with the Rocko's Modern Life and Doug and Ren and Stimpy and all that stuff.
Right.
And so,
right.
you know, I do remember thinking it was cool that, like, you know, Nickelodeon was all slime and grossness and all that stuff. And I'm sure what was happening behind the scenes was even more outrageous, but they had to sort of figure out what they, you know, could get away with on TV and what would be right for kids and what would be, you know, acceptable for for parents, even if they were maybe a little disapproving. And that's what made it fun as a kid.
Yeah, I have my best friend in the world. His parents, he was one of 4 brothers. And I remember when we first started talking, this was maybe about like 1995 in the 3rd grade. And actually it was 96 then. His parents did not let them watch Nickelodeon at all.
Oh,
like
yeah.
they were super, you know, against it. And eventually, like within 2 or 3 years, they had laxed to an incredible degree, like to the other direction. But like for that first, it like blew my mind that there were parents out there who thought that Nickelodeon, like, this is inappropriate, really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Now, just one last question about your time with SpongeBob. With all of the notes and kind of, you got to see that behind the curtain a little bit of that world and learn about characters of maybe things that the fans don't outright get to hear. Do you have any surprising ones that really caught you off guard?
Yeah, you know, a thing that I was kind of surprised to learn about, and it makes a more sense after I learned that Steve Hillenburg had like experience in marine biology and stuff, is that there were a lot of hard and fast rules about the characters regarding their kind of like physiology. Like I remember I turned in a script with my scripts were actually like doodles because I just think visually, and so I drew Squidward with this big toothy smile, and I heard back, oh, Squidward doesn't have teeth because squids don't actually have teeth, and so that's just one of Hillenburg's rules. And I also kind of was told at one point, Steve doesn't love jokes where SpongeBob's compared to a household sponge. Like, they get through a little bit. They arguably were pretty heavy in this one short that we just watched, actually. But that they try to kind of stay away from that because maybe it's a little too easy, but also maybe that it was important to say that, like, SpongeBob is an undersea sponge, not a sponge that you would buy at a grocery store, you know?
I mean, they also have the episode with Hans, the Suds episode, where he is pretty much used as a kitchen sponge, and then he's been an actual kitchen sponge many times. That is surprising that they would kind of push away from that, but he does live under the ocean, so it is fair.
Maybe it was just the kind of thing where they'd seen that joke so many times that they were just kind of like, okay, enough with the sponge stuff.
Yeah, that is completely valid. Completely valid.
Who knows? Yeah, yeah.
Now, do you still keep up with SpongeBob, or have you just kind of kept it in the background a little bit more?
Yeah, I would say it's more of a background thing, admittedly. Yeah, I like SpongeBob. I've always thought that it was like one of the better cartoons, and it's pretty amazing to me that it has lasted, this long as far as like in the public consciousness and stuff without really any breaks, which is incredible. But yeah, I'm not watching it on a regular basis or anything like that.
No, I fell off the wagon a while ago, and kind of one of the purposes of this show was to almost force myself to watch it through.
Mm-hmm.
But I gotta say, newer stuff I've heard has kind of, the quality has drastically improved to a more creative level. So, but how does it feel going back to this? Is this a classic episode to you, or do you consider, when did you first watch this episode?
Oh gosh, I don't know. It seemed familiar to me, but it was kind of hazy because I probably saw it when it was on TV. Maybe new or in early reruns or something. But it seemed like vaguely familiar to me, but I couldn't have told you off the top of my head any of the specific jokes or anything like that.
But at least when you watch this feels like, does this nostalgic to you in some regards?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect.
It takes me back, and and I love it. I do like, like I said, I do still really like SpongeBob. I think the last like kind of new SpongeBob thing I saw was the movie that somewhat, this is several years back now, but the one where they come on land and it becomes the
Sponge Out of Water.
Yes, that
Yes.
one. And which was exciting to me. Like I said, I went to college in Savannah, and those live action scenes were filmed in Savannah, so I could be like, oh, I know that street, and things like that.
Did you recognize anything?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, they replaced a lot of the signage, I think maybe digitally, so that they weren't showing actual businesses. But the big car chase is down that kind of main street where a lot of restaurants and stuff are, where I would hang out quite a lot when I went to
That's
college.
actually pretty exciting. That's
Yeah.
that's a pretty cool little tidbit. Next time you're out there dining around and you're like, hey, this is where SpongeBob was.
Yeah, totally.
Well, I would even say some of the newer stuff. The newest movie I would say is worth a watch. The Camp Coral spinoff has some moments I would say are worth watching, and there have been some recent episodes I would say are worth giving a shot. So I would say it's worth for you to jump back into this world. But I appreciate you jumping in with me today.
Yeah, it was fun, and it did kind of make me want to watch more SpongeBob stuff. So I'll see what's out there.
Hey, there you go. I gotta say, I gotta point out, you have an amazingly put out website. Exploring it was an absolute blast. So I'm gonna have that in the description of the podcast in both audio and video form. So, is there anything that you would like to plug, sir?
Great. Yeah, sure. People can follow me on Twitter at Joey Weiser or Joey Weiser Comics on Instagram. Instagram's a bit more focused, just art and stuff relating to my career as a cartoonist. My Twitter is a little bit more all over the place, where I'm just talking about whatever movies and cartoons and things I'm watching. But I'm also promoting my work there. And yeah, please look out for Dragon Racer. That's my newest graphic novel. Just came out in June. And it's a self-contained book. It's got some of the characters from Ghost Hog, but you can pick up Dragon Racer and read it without reading Ghost Hog, or you can pick them both up. Check out my website for previews for all my books and a few like full short comics that you can read and examples of my illustrations and stuff. And I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, and Dragon Racer is Oni Press put that out, correct?
Yep.
So what were you saying?
Oh yeah, I was just saying it's available wherever you get books, because Oni Press has that distributed through Simon and Schuster. So wherever you prefer to buy books. If you want to buy a signed copy, I might as well say you can order that from Avid Bookshop, AVID. That's the local bookshop here in Athens where I live. And if you make a note letting them know that you'd like a signed copy, they'll get in touch with me. And before they send it to you, I'll come in and do a little drawing and sign my name and stuff in it for you.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Well, Joey, thank you so much for coming on the show. You're welcome on anytime again. It was lovely to talk with you, and I hope everything goes well for you.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Magic Conj, will I ever get to meet Tom Kenny?
Maybe someday.
Oh, so you're saying there's a chance. Okay. Should I tell fans of the show how they can support us?
Yes.
Goofy Goobers, supporting the show is shockingly easier than catching a blue jellyfish. Right from our Anchor page, anchor.fm/SpongePod, you can find links to all of our social media and a support button if you happen to have a few extra clams. Also follow us on twitch.tv/SpongeBobPodcast, where it's not only the official home to our sister show, Video Bob Game Pants, it's also where I stream live drawings of various Nickelodeon characters and host the opportunity for commissions and giveaways. Lastly, the official merchandise store is now open at redbubble.com/people/SpongePod, where various designs will be uploaded inspired by our show, including our official logo, which is now available on a multitude of products like t-shirts, stickers, duvet covers, and even a shower curtain. This is a podcast by a fan, for fans, and will always be fan-driven. Any way you see fit on supporting our show is much appreciated. Thank you, and enjoy.